Somewhere in your brain right now, there is a map. It was drawn slowly, over years, sometimes over decades. It contains the voice of a specific person, the weight of their hand, the exact sound of their footsteps in the next room, the space they occupied at a table. Your brain built that map because it needed it. And when that person dies, the map does not disappear. That is the first thing the science tells us that almost no one is prepared for. The map stays. The brain keeps predicting a world that no longer exists. This has a mechanism, and the mechanism is the reason grief feels less like sadness and more like a malfunction of reality itself. At the University of Arizona, a neuroscientist named Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor spent years studying what actually happens inside the grieving brain. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, she watched the brains of people who had recently lost someone they loved. What she found was not a single sadness center lighting up. It was something stranger. The brain was behaving as though it held two contradictory facts at the same time. One, this person is gone. Two, this person still exists and will return. These two beliefs were not competing in some abstract emotional space. They were running on separate neural systems, and neither one could fully overrule the other. This is what O'Connor calls the gone but also everlasting problem. And it is not a metaphor. It is a measurable feature of how memory and attachment are stored. To understand why, you have to understand what your brain was doing long before the loss. When you are close to someone for years, your brain encodes them into 3 coordinates, where they are in space, when you will see them next, and who they are to you. Neuroscientists sometimes describe this as the mapping of a loved one across the dimensions of space, time, and closeness. That mapping is not stored as a fact you can simply delete. It is built into the prediction machinery of the brain itself. Here is the distinction that matters, and it is one the science is careful about. That the brain encodes attachment figures is clinically confirmed. The precise claim that it uses 3 literal dimensions is a model, a mechanistically plausible framework that fits the data. Hold that difference in your mind, because this entire subject lives in the space between what has been measured and what has been inferred. Now, the mechanism. Your brain is not a passive recorder of the world. It is a prediction engine. Every moment, it is generating a forecast of what should happen next and comparing that forecast against what actually arrives through your senses. When the two match, you feel nothing. The prediction was correct. The world is as expected. This is why you do not consciously notice the chair beneath you or the hum of a familiar house. Your brain predicted them, they arrived, and the signal went quiet. When someone you love has been beside you for years, your brain has been predicting their presence continuously. The sound of the key in the door at 6 in the evening, the particular rhythm of their breathing at night, the reflexive turn of your head to tell them something. These predictions were correct thousands upon thousands of times, and every time they were confirmed, the prediction grew stronger, more automatic, more deeply wired. Then they die, and the prediction does not stop. This is the core of the neurological cruelty of grief. The forecasting machinery cannot be updated with a single announcement. You can be told the news. You can attend the funeral. You can understand, with the rational part of your mind, that they are gone. But the predictive systems buried deeper in the brain continue to generate the old forecast. You turn to speak to them. You listen for the key in the door. For a fraction of a second, you expect them, fully and completely, and then the sensory world fails to deliver. The prediction error fires, and the loss happens again, not once, every single time. Dr. O'Connor described this with a precision that stays with you. She said that grief is the cost of learning that someone is gone. The word learning is doing enormous work in that sentence, because learning is not a moment. Learning is the slow, repeated physical rewiring of neural tissue. Your brain has to be taught, prediction by failed prediction, that the world has changed, and it can only learn this the hard way, by being wrong, again and again. I've spent months putting together what I'm calling What Feynman Knew About Grief. a companion to everything this channel explores. The link is in the pinned comment below. Stay with me, because the part that most people find hardest to believe is still ahead. What happens to the brain when the shock finally wears off, and why does that make things worse instead of better? Let us go deeper into the machinery, because the prediction system is only one gear. There is a second one, and it lives in your body chemistry. When you are attached to someone, your brain associates their presence with a specific neurochemical state. Contact with a loved one, their voice, their touch, even a photograph, triggers the release of a set of molecules the brain uses to signal safety and reward. Among them is a system involving oxytocin and the brain's natural opioids. This is not poetry. Attachment is, at the level of biochemistry, a form of regulated dependency. The presence of the person you love is doing something measurable to your neurochemistry. It is keeping a set of systems in balance. Dr. Naomi Eisenberger at the University of California, Los Angeles, ran a series of studies on what she called social pain. Her team found that when people experienced social rejection or loss, the brain activated regions overlapping with those that process physical pain. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the anterior insula. These are the same structures that register the pain of a burn or a broken bone. This is the mechanistic reason grief does not merely feel emotional. It registers, in part, on the same circuitry as bodily injury. When people say the loss hurt, they are not reaching for a metaphor. The brain is processing a portion of that loss through its pain apparatus, and there is a reason this overlap exists at all. In evolutionary terms, being separated from your group meant danger. For most of the history of our species, isolation was close to a death sentence, so the brain repurposed the alarm system it already had. Rather than building a separate machinery for social loss, it wired the ache of separation into the same circuits that warn you about a wound. The result is that a broken attachment and a broken bone are, at the level of neural signaling, partial neighbors. This is mechanistically plausible and supported by the imaging, though the precise degree of overlap is still debated. What is not in doubt is that the body treats the loss of a person as an injury to be registered, not merely an idea to be considered. There is a further consequence that people rarely connect to the loss itself. Sleep collapses, appetite vanishes or turns strange. The immune system weakens, and the risk of physical illness measurably rises in the months after a major bereavement. This is sometimes called the widowhood effect, the documented increase in mortality among people who have recently lost a spouse. None of this is imagined. When the regulating presence is removed, the systems it was helping to stabilize begin to drift. The grief is not only in the mind, it moves through the entire body, because the attachment was never confined to the mind in the first place. So now you have two mechanisms running at once: a prediction system that keeps expecting a person who will never arrive, and a chemistry that has lost the source of a signal it was built to depend on. The presence that regulated you is gone, and the systems that were tuned to it are now firing into an absence. And this is where the timeline of grief begins to make a terrible kind of sense. In the first hours and days, many people describe a strange numbness, a sense of unreality, functioning almost normally while feeling as though they are watching themselves from behind glass. This is not weakness, and it is not denial in the ordinary sense. It is, in part, a stress response. The acute shock of loss floods the body with stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline. These can produce a kind of protective blunting. The system is overwhelmed, and it partially shuts down conscious emotional processing to keep the organism operating. People drive to the hospital, they make phone calls, they arrange the details, and only later do they wonder how they moved through those first hours at all. Then the stress response begins to settle, and this is the part almost no one is warned about. As the numbness lifts, the pain does not lift with it. It arrives. The protective shock was holding the full weight back, and when it recedes, the weight comes down. This is why so many people report that the second week, the second month, The moment after everyone else has returned to their lives is worse than the funeral itself. The chemistry that was blunting the blow has normalized, and now the brain has to do the actual learning. Prediction by failed prediction. Absence by absence. If this is the kind of understanding you have been looking for, the kind that explains rather than consoles, then what Feynman knew about grief connects everything we are examining here. The link is in the pinned comment. There is a third mechanism, and it may be the strangest of all. It concerns not the person you lost, but the version of yourself that existed in relation to them. Deep in the brain sits a set of connected regions called the default mode network. It becomes active when you are not focused on the outside world, when your mind wanders, reflects, remembers, imagines the future. It is, as much as anything in neuroscience can be, the seat of your sense of self and your autobiographical story. And crucially, for anyone you have loved for a long time, that person is woven into your default mode network. They are part of the story your brain tells about who you are. Your identity was not built alone. It was built partly out of another person. Researchers studying this network have found that our closest relationships are, in a real sense, represented inside our own self-model. The neuroscientist sometimes puts it this way: the people we love become part of us, not metaphorically, but structurally, encoded into the very networks that generate our sense of self. So when they die, the loss is not only external. A part of your own self-representation has lost the thing it was anchored to. This is why grieving people so often say they no longer know who they are. It is not a figure of speech. The self was co-authored, and one of the authors is gone. The remaining structure has to be slowly, painfully rebuilt around an absence at its center. Now hold all three mechanisms together, because their convergence is the whole picture. A prediction engine that will not stop forecasting a person who cannot arrive. A chemistry that lost the signal it was tuned to and now runs on pain circuitry. And a sense of self that was partly constructed out of the one who is gone. These are not three separate sadnesses. They are three systems, all wired to the same person, all firing into the same emptiness. That is why grief is not a mood you can reason your way out of. It is distributed across the deepest architecture of the brain. And here, the science makes a distinction I want to be honest about. That grief involves these systems is well supported. That grief follows neat, predictable stages is not. The old idea of grief moving through fixed, sequential stages has been largely set aside by researchers. The neuroscientist Dr. George Bonanno at Columbia University studied large numbers of bereaved people over time and found no universal staircase. What he found instead was variety. Some people are flattened for years. Some carry a quiet ache that never fully leaves but does not disable them. Some, remarkably, remain relatively stable, and this is not a sign that they loved less. There is no single correct shape. The mechanisms are shared. The trajectory is not. The companion guide is in the pinned comment below, only while this video is up. Which brings us, at last, to why this understanding matters at all. Because if the map does not disappear, if the brain keeps predicting a person who is gone, one question sits underneath everything. What is that prediction actually reaching for? What is it that the brain cannot let go of? Here a physicist can help us, not as a teacher, but as someone who stood exactly where you may be standing. In June of 1945, while he was working at Los Alamos, Richard Feynman's wife, Arlene, died of tuberculosis. He had loved her since they were teenagers. 16 months after her death, he sat down and wrote her a letter. He told her about his days. He told her he wanted to comfort her and that he could not because she was not there. And then, at the very end, he added a line that reveals something the neuroscience has been circling this entire time. He wrote, "Please excuse my not mailing this, but I don't know your new address." Think about what that sentence actually is. It is a prediction system that will not update. It is a man who knew, with the full force of his extraordinary mind, exactly what death was, and whose deeper brain still reached for her as though she were simply somewhere he could not yet locate. The rational physicist understood. The prediction engine did not. The letter was never sent, and it was found in his papers 43 years later, only after his own death. The reaching had never stopped. That is what the grieving brain is. It is the most sophisticated prediction machine known to exist, forecasting the presence of someone it was built over years to expect. The forecast was not a mistake. It was the record of how much they were there. Every failed prediction, every turn of the head toward an empty room, is the measure of a presence that shaped the physical structure of your brain. The pain is not evidence that something has gone wrong with you. It is the exact size of what was there. The brain does not forget the ones it loved. It cannot. They were built into its predictions, its chemistry, its very model of the self. The map remains, and the mind goes on quietly reaching toward a place it can no longer find. Before this video ends, thank you. Truly, you are the reason this channel exists. YouTube removed our ad monetization, and even after that, they continue running ads on our videos, collecting that revenue while we receive nothing. So we created What Feynman Knew About Grief, not as a business move, but as a way to keep this reaching more people without depending on a system working against us. If what you found here mattered to you, the link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Only while this video runs. Feynman never sent the letter, but he wrote it anyway. We keep making these anyway.